Smoke detector in the 42nd floor boardroom of Callaway Financial had never gone off before. Not once in 11 years of quarterly reviews, hostile takeovers, and the kind of seven-figure decisions that made grown men sweat through their collars. So when it screamed at 8:47 on a Tuesday morning, every head in the room turned toward the small woman standing near the credenza, holding what had once been a coffee maker and was now unmistakably a source of smoke. Sloane Whitfield set the machine down very carefully, the way you set down something that has already betrayed you and might do so again. "I was just trying to make coffee," she said, to no one and everyone. The man at the head of the table did not move. He sat with his hands flat on the mahogany surface, his expression the particular kind of still that comes not from calm but from the effort of containing something much larger. His name was Rowan Ashby. He was 38, the CEO of the third-largest private investment firm in Canada, and he had not, in recent memory, been surprised by anything. He was surprised now. "This," his executive assistant Marcus said from the doorway, fanning smoke with a manila folder, "is not the catering team." Sloane turned toward the voice. She was 29, 5'4", with paint-stained fingers. She hadn't fully scrubbed clean from last night's shift at the Community Arts Center where she worked, where she was supposed to be right now. Not standing in a glass-walled boardroom on the 42nd floor of a building she had never intended to enter. "I know I'm not," she said. "I'm looking for the learning annex. It's supposed to be on this floor." She looked at the smoke rising gently from the coffee maker. "I may have touched something I shouldn't have." Rowan Ashby looked at the ruined machine. He looked at the woman. He looked at the presentation deck still glowing on the screen behind him. 40 slides, 2 years of restructuring data, a $12 billion portfolio review scheduled to begin in exactly 9 minutes. "Marcus," he said. "Already calling facilities," Marcus said. Rowan stood. He was the kind of tall that filled a doorway without trying, the kind of composed that made assistants speak in lower voices when he was nearby. He walked to the credenza, looked at the coffee maker, and then looked at Sloane Whitfield the way he had looked at every unexpected variable in his career, as a problem to be identified, categorized, and resolved. "The learning annex," he said, "is in the building next door." Sloane blinked. There are two towers." She looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows. Sure enough, a matching glass building stood perhaps 30 meters away, connected by a sky bridge she had walked straight past. She had been looking at her phone. She was always looking at her phone at the wrong moment, and not looking at it during the right ones. "I'm so sorry," she said. She meant it completely. "I'll go. Right now. I'll go." She picked up her bag, a canvas tote with a smear of cerulean blue along the strap, and moved toward the door past 6 people in suits who were watching her the way people watch a pigeon that has flown into a restaurant, with a mixture of disbelief and reluctant fascination. She stopped. She stopped because she had glanced just briefly at the screen behind Rowan Ashby's chair. Not intentionally. She glanced the way people glance at strangers' laptops on the subway, reflexively without meaning to, and then slightly guilty about it. But something caught her eye, a number. A specific number in a column near the bottom of slide 14, visible because the presentation was still running, still glowing, and the number was wrong. She knew it was wrong the way she always knew, the way she had always known since she was 7 years old and corrected her father's grocery receipts at the kitchen table. Numbers had a shape in her mind. A correct number sat flat, a wrong one tilted, like a picture frame slightly off the wall. She couldn't explain it any better than that, and she had stopped trying. "That column," she said. Rowan turned. "Pardon?" She pointed at the screen, her cerulean-stained finger gesturing at slide 14. "The third column, the carry-forward figure. It's out by," she tilted her head, counting silently, "about $840,000. Give or take." The room was very quiet. "You were here for approximately 4 minutes, Rowan said. "You destroyed a coffee maker. And now you're telling me there's an error in a financial presentation that 6 analysts spent 3 weeks building." "I'm not telling you there's an error," Sloane said. "I'm telling you that number looks wrong to me. I could be mistaken." She paused. "I'm not usually mistaken, but I could be." Rowan looked at his lead analyst, a careful man named Arthur who had been with the firm for 9 years and who now had the expression of someone doing complex arithmetic in his head against his will. "Check it," Rowan said. Arthur checked it. The silence that followed lasted about 90 seconds. 90 seconds during which Sloane shifted her canvas tote from one shoulder to the other and tried very hard to look like someone who had somewhere else to be, which she did. The learning annex orientation started in 4 minutes, and yet found herself incapable of leaving. "It's out by $832,000, Arthur said quietly. Rowan turned back to Sloane Whitfield. She was already edging toward the door. "Wait," he said. She stopped again. She seemed to do that a lot in this room. "Sit down," he said. And then, as if catching himself more evenly, "Please." Sloane looked at the chair he was gesturing to. She looked at the door. She looked at the smoke still curling faintly from the credenza. She sat down. The portfolio review was pushed back 20 minutes, while Arthur's team went through the remaining 39 slides with a different kind of attention. Sloane sat in the chair at the far end of the table and looked at her phone, mostly to have somewhere to put her eyes, and tried not to think about the orientation she was missing, or the fact that she had broken an appliance in a room full of people who probably earned more in a month than she did in a year. She found 2 more errors. She didn't mean to. The deck was still on the screen, cycling through as the analysts worked, and her eyes kept drifting up and catching numbers that tilted wrong. The first was a transposition on slide 22, a figure entered as 1.47 instead of 1.74. The second was a subtotal on slide 31 that simply didn't add up. A small arithmetic mistake buried inside a larger table where it would have been invisible to anyone not looking for it, and nearly invisible to anyone who was. She wrote them on the back of a receipt from her bag and slid it down the table to Arthur without saying anything. Arthur read it. He verified both. He passed the paper to Rowan Ashby without looking up. Rowan read the paper. He looked at Sloane. She was studying a water stain on the carpet. He had been running Callaway Financial for 6 years. Before that, he had spent 4 years restructuring distressed assets in Calgary, and before that, a decade in Toronto learning from the kind of men who saw sentimentality as a liability and precision as the only currency that mattered. He had built the firm on a specific belief that thoroughness was not a personality trait, it was a survival mechanism. Every process double-checked, every figure triple-confirmed, every variable accounted for before a single decision was made. He was also, though he rarely examined this, exhausted. Not the kind of exhausted that sleep fixes. The kind that settles into the shoulders and the jaw and the particular way a person holds a pen too tightly for too many years. He had noticed it more in the past 8 months. The way his apartment felt too quiet. The way he ate dinner standing over the kitchen counter because sitting at the table alone felt like a decision he didn't want to make. The way he had stopped calling his sister back in Halifax as often as he used to. He didn't think about any of this consciously as he looked at the piece of receipt paper with 2 numbers written on it in a hand that still had cerulean blue paint on the side of the pinky. But something shifted, slightly, in the way he was sitting. "You work in arts administration," he said. She looked up. "How do you know that?" The tote had the Community Arts Center logo on it, a small stylized paintbrush over the word Harbor Light. "Oh," she said, "yes, I run the youth programs. Painting, mostly, some ceramics." She paused. "I'm terrible at ceramics. But the kids like the mess, and you have a background in finance." "No." She seemed almost apologetic about it. "I studied fine arts. Before that, 2 years of accounting, which I left because..." She stopped. "It doesn't matter. I just see numbers sometimes. I always have." "You see numbers. They look wrong when they're wrong. Like when a painting is hung crooked. You can just tell." She shrugged, the way she had learned to shrug about things that other people found strange. "My dad's an electrician. He always said some people are built to see things other people walk past. I think that's probably true for most kinds of things." Rowan looked at her for a long moment. There was something in the way she said it, plainly, without performance, as if she were reporting a fact about the weather, that he found unexpectedly disarming. "The presentation," he said. "Those 3 errors. Combined, they would have produced a misstatement of approximately 2.3 million in our projected figures." Sloane absorbed this. "That's a lot of money," she said. "In the context of a $12 billion review," he said, "it's not catastrophic, but the board would have caught it. And the conversation that follows when the board catches something your analysts missed is not a conversation I enjoy." I can imagine. He doubted she could, actually, but he appreciated the tact. Marcus appeared in the doorway and signaled that the room was needed. The board members would arrive in 12 minutes. The smoke had cleared. Someone from facilities had quietly removed the coffee maker. "The Learning Annex," Rowan said, standing, "will have another orientation next Thursday. I can have Marcus send you the details if you'd like." Sloane stood too, pulling her bag over her shoulder. "I already missed the main point of today's one, so probably yes." She was nearly through the door when he said Mrs. Whitfield. She turned. She didn't ask how he knew her name. She was wearing a lanyard from the Arts Center with her name on it. She had forgotten she was wearing it, as she often forgot she was wearing it. "Thank you," Rowan Ashby said. It came out simply, without ceremony, which made it feel more genuine than if he had dressed it up. You didn't have to say anything. The number was wrong, Sloane said. I can't just not say something when a number is wrong. It's like seeing someone's collar turned up. You just fix it. She left. The elevator doors closed. And Rowan Ashby stood at the head of his boardroom table and found himself thinking, for the first time in longer than he could remember, about something other than the $12 billion review. He thought about it for exactly 45 seconds. Then the board arrived, and he put it away. He was good at putting things away. He had always been good at that. Sloane did not think about Rowan Ashby or the 42nd floor or the presentation errors for most of the following week. She thought about the orientation she had missed and the ceramics kiln that was making a sound it shouldn't be making, and the 15-year-old named Owen, who had shown up to Tuesday's painting class with genuine talent, and the particular defensiveness of someone who suspected they had it and didn't know what to do with that. She thought about her apartment in Kensington Market, which was small and had a radiator that clanked and walls she had painted herself in a color the can called sage, but which she thought looked more like the inside of a cucumber. She thought about her best friend Priya, who kept sending her apartment listings in better buildings, and who did not fully understand that Sloane was not dissatisfied with her life so much as unsure, sometimes, that she was in the right one. It was not an unhappy unsureness. It was more like the feeling of a shoe that mostly fit. She did not think about Rowan Ashby. He, on the other hand, thought about her exactly twice before Thursday, and both times was irritated by it. The first time was when Arthur produced the corrected presentation for the second board review, and noted, with the careful neutrality of someone who has learned to be careful and neutral around their employer, that the walk-in had caught errors that 2 rounds of internal review had missed. The second time was when Rowan walked past the Harborlight Arts Center on his way back from a lunch meeting near the waterfront and saw, through the front window, a room full of children holding paint-covered hands in the air like they were celebrating something, and one adult at the back of the room laughing at something a small boy had apparently done to a canvas. He didn't stop, he kept walking. But he looked. Marcus sent Sloane the Thursday orientation details, as promised. She attended in the correct building this time, and afterward found herself in the lobby of the main tower, waiting for the elevator, because the sky bridge connecting the 2 buildings was temporarily closed for maintenance, and this was, apparently, the recommended alternate route. The elevator opened. Rowan Ashby was in it. They looked at each other. "The sky bridge," she said, "is closed," he said. "Yes." She stepped in. The doors closed. They stood in the particular silence of 2 people who have been introduced to each other in an unusual way and are now in a small metal box together. "The orientation," he said. "How was it?" "The coffee machine in the annex also malfunctioned while I was there." She paused. "I don't know if I caused that one." Something crossed his face. It was very nearly a smile. "Marcus told me," she added, "that the board review went well. It did." He was quiet for a moment. The corrected figures held up. "Good." She meant that genuinely. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Neither of them moved immediately, which was its own kind of information. "There's a cafe across the street," he said. "If you have time." Sloane Whitfield looked at the man. At the very straight posture, the careful way he chose each word, the slight loosening around the jaw that she suspected most people never got to see. She was not someone who made decisions quickly, except when she did, and when she did, she was always certain. "I have 40 minutes," she said, "but I can't promise anything won't break." This time he actually smiled. It changed his whole face. It changed it the way light changes a room that's been shut up too long. Suddenly, it was apparent that the bones were better, the proportions finer, the whole thing more worth looking at than you had initially registered. They crossed the street. The cafe was warm and smelled like cardamom and dark roast. They sat across from each other at a small corner table and talked for 55 minutes, not 40, about things that had nothing to do with quarterly reviews or portfolio errors. About Rowan's sister in Halifax, who ran a lobster boat and who he had not visited in 2 years and who had told him, the last time they spoke, that he was in danger of becoming somebody nobody particularly wanted at dinner. About Sloane's father, the electrician, who had taught her that the most important skill in any trade was learning to see what other people had decided wasn't their problem. About Owen, the 15-year-old with defensive talent who had started showing up to the Thursday class without being asked. The coffee Sloane ordered arrived with a design in the foam. She photographed it before she drank it. "You photograph your coffee," Rowan said. "I photograph everything," she said. "Or I used to. I was a photographer before I was an arts administrator. Before that, an accounting student. Before that, I wanted to be a marine biologist, but it turns out I'm afraid of open water, so." She wrapped both hands around the mug. I've arrived at myself gradually. Rowan thought about this. He had arrived at himself very quickly and very directly, and he was no longer certain this had been entirely to his benefit. How do you know, he said, when a number is wrong? Is it immediate? Always immediate, she said, like reading a sentence with a word missing. Your eye catches the gap before your brain does, and you never second-guess it? I used to. I learned not to. She looked at him. Do you second-guess yourself? He considered giving her a professional answer, the kind he gave in interviews. He gave her a real one instead. Less than I used to, he said. More than I probably appear to. She nodded, as if this confirmed something. They parted on the sidewalk. He went back toward his building. She went toward the waterfront. She did not look back. He did not look back either, but he noted, for the second time, where the Harborlight Arts Center was located relative to his regular lunch route. He called his sister in Halifax that evening. She answered on the second ring, which meant she had been hoping he'd call, though she would never say so. You sound different, she said, about 10 minutes in. I sound the same. You sound less like someone narrating a press release, she said. What happened? Nothing happened, he said. Someone walked into the wrong room, and he was quiet for a moment. Outside his apartment window, the city was doing what it always did at 9 o'clock on a Thursday, glittering, indifferent, enormous. And nothing yet, he said. Just, someone walked into the wrong room and it turned out to matter. His sister, who was practical in the way that people who work on boats are practical, said, rooms are like that. You walk into the wrong one and suddenly you've got a completely different view. The next 3 weeks proceeded with the careful, slightly charged quality of two people who are paying attention to each other without admitting it. Rowan began taking his lunch route past the waterfront more often. Sloane began keeping a closer eye on her lanyard because she had discovered that wearing it into unlikely situations had a peculiar tendency to produce interesting results. They met twice more, once at the cafe again, once by accident at the weekend farmers market near Kensington, where Sloane was buying heirloom tomatoes for a reason she couldn't quite justify, and Rowan was buying coffee beans and looking mildly out of place in the context of artisanal cheese displays. Both times they talked longer than they planned. Both times she said something that made him reconsider a thing he had assumed. Both times he said something that made her feel, quietly, that she was talking to someone who was actually listening, which was rarer than it should have been. She met Arthur, by accident, when she stopped by the Tower lobby to drop off a pamphlet about a youth fundraiser at Harborlight that she had promised Marcus she'd bring. Arthur told her, with the careful neutrality of someone who had decided to abandon careful neutrality just briefly, that she was the first person in 6 years to make the boss eat lunch somewhere with windows. She found this funnier than she probably should have. The gala was Callaway Financial's annual client event. Black tie, Fairmont Hotel, the kind of evening that requires a different pair of shoes than Sloane owned. She was there because Harborlight was one of the charitable partners featured in the firm's community investment report, and the program director had sent her instead of coming himself because he had the flu and trusted her to represent them without catastrophe. She had worn her good dress, which was forest green and which she had bought for her cousin's wedding 2 years ago, and which she felt held up well. She had not broken anything by 9 o'clock. She was considering this a personal record. Rowan found her near the silent auction table, examining a weekend getaway package to Prince Edward Island with the focused attention she normally reserved for number columns. You're evaluating it, he said. The listed value seems high for the accommodation tier, she said, not looking up. But if you factor in the restaurant they've included, it actually tracks. She looked up. Hi. Hi, he said. He looked, she thought, like himself but clearer, the same careful posture, but with something in the eyes that was less guarded than the first day in the boardroom, as if some of the glass had come down. She had noticed this happening gradually. She didn't think he had. You look, he said, and then stopped and started again. That color suits you. Thank you, she said. You look like someone who belongs here. You look like someone who doesn't think she does, he said, and who is wrong about that. She looked at him for a moment. You've gotten better at saying things like that. I've had some practice lately, he said. Someone told me I sounded like a press release. Was she wrong? No, he said. She was entirely right. The program began. There were speeches and a video presentation about community investment, and a section in which 3 of the charitable partners were invited to speak briefly about their work. The Harborlight director was supposed to speak. He was, as established, home with the flu. The events coordinator found Sloane at her table 7 minutes before the segment. We need someone, he said. 2 minutes. Just what you do, who you're reaching, why it matters. Sloane looked at the stage. She looked at the microphone. She thought about Owen, who had shown up to Thursday class again and again without being asked, and who had stopped being defensive about his talent in the last 2 weeks and started being curious about it instead, which was so much better. She went up. She stood at the microphone, and she talked about a 15-year-old who thought art was something that happened to other people until it happened to him. She talked about what it looks like when a kid realizes that what they're good at might actually matter. She talked about the Community Arts Center not as an institution but as a room that some people walked into sideways, unexpectedly, and then couldn't quite bring themselves to leave. She was not nervous. She had spent years talking to rooms full of children who were paying half attention, which is excellent preparation for talking to rooms full of adults who are paying full attention, because at least the adults were not also trying to eat a snack. When she finished, there was a moment, that very particular moment between the end of a thing and the beginning of applause, that felt like held breath. And then the room gave her the kind of response that is not polite but genuine, and Sloane Whitfield walked back to her table with steady hands and the quiet, deep satisfaction of having said something she meant. Rowan Ashby, seated at the head table, had not taken his eyes off her once. He had known, somewhere around the 3rd week and the farmer's market, that this had already become something different than a chance correction in a boardroom. He had known it the way she knew wrong numbers, not gradually, not logically, but as a simple fact that arrived fully formed and then sat there, waiting for him to catch up to it. After the program, after the dessert service, after Marcus had given him a look that communicated approximately 17 things without saying any of them, Rowan found her near the windows that overlooked the city. "You were right," he said. She turned. "About what?" "Earlier. I said you looked like someone who didn't think she belonged here." He paused. "I was wrong about the second part. You belong wherever you decide to be." Sloane looked at him. The city glittered behind the glass. Somewhere down on the street, a streetcar went past, the kind that makes a sound like a chord. "Rowan," she said. It was the first time she had used his first name, he noticed. "I walked into the wrong building and broke your coffee maker. You also found 3 errors in a $12 billion portfolio review that 6 analysts missed," he said, "and told a room full of strangers something true about what it means to find the thing you're built for." He was quiet for a moment. "I think you walked into exactly the right building." She looked at him for a long time. She had always been someone who saw things clearly and quickly. Numbers, colors, the moment when a piece of tipped slightly wrong. She saw him very clearly now, a careful closed man who had been slowly remembering how to be open, partly on his own and partly because someone had walked into his boardroom and started seeing things. "The Skybridge is probably back open by now," she said. "Probably," he said. "I'm still going to take the elevator," she said, "on the off chance you're in it." He reached out and took her hand, not dramatically, just quietly, the way you do when something has already been decided and you're simply acknowledging it. They stayed at the window for a while longer. The city did what cities do, moved and lit itself up and carried on around them. Outside somewhere, the streetcar came back the other way, and in a room full of people who had somewhere to be, 2 people stood still for a minute, together, in the specific contentment of having finally stopped walking past what they'd been looking for.